Hey everyone, my name's Rich, and this is the first of what I hope to be a long-lasting series covering the restoration and modification of this magnificent specimen behind me. So, yeah, I'll introduce the car, go through a little history lesson, and go over my plans for the car. So yeah, what I've got back here, this is a 1997 Ford Mustang SVT Cobra. I'm sure there are a lot of gearheads watching this video that already know the history about SVT, so feel free to fast forward. But if you're new to SVT or the Cobras, I'll just give you a quick overview. So as far as the Mustangs go, the first SVT Cobra came out in 1993. And that was the older Fox body platform that preceded this body style. And that went from 79 to 93. That was the last year for the Fox body Mustang, was 1993. So that was a cool send-off to have that Cobra. The Cobra went from 1993 to 2004, and that was the top-level Mustang that you could buy, save for the even more exclusive Cobra R, but that's a whole other story. The 93 came with a slightly bumped up horsepower version of the 5.0 302. And then when this body style came out in 94, the drivetrain transferred. They kept the 5.0 for 94 and 95. And then when this range came out, which went from 96 to 98, Ford got rid of the 5.0 for the Mustang, and then they went to the modular V8, and the GTs got the 4.6 2-valve version, and this is the 4-valve version. It's all aluminum. It puts out 305 horsepower and 300 pound-feet of torque. The thing about this car, the SVT cars, the engines were hand-built by a two-man team, and that was a pretty cool exclusive thing about the Cobras. They weren't, it wasn't 100% assembly line. They had the special treatment. So, and it was always cool that with the Cobras, whenever the two-man engine team was finished building it, they put on the passenger side valve cover, there's a little sticker for the earlier ones, including mine. Mine's in early 97, but in late 97 on up to 2004, they put a little aluminum plaque on there where they engraved their names in there. But it was a really cool exclusive thing, and I like that it has that. The engine is not new for Ford. It is new for the Mustang, but Ford had been using it in the Lincoln Mark 8. I think there were slight differences. I think the cams are different. I don't remember about the block, but it's basically the same engine that they put in here, and these Cobra engines have an all aluminum setup. The block was made by a company called Texid in Italy, and I think they are known for building Formula One race car engines, from what I've read. And I hear that these can handle upwards of 900 to 1,000 horsepower, so that's pretty cool. These Cobras, prior to the Terminator Cobras, which came out in 2003, 2004, they all came with forged cranks, but everything else is cast, and I hear you can probably get away with about 425 to 500 horsepower if you're doing modifications before you have to break down the engine and build up the rest of it in a forged rotating assembly. That's where the Terminator comes in. Those were 2003, 2004. And they had superchargers from the factory, and they were really kind of a unicorn among the SVT Cobra. I mean, they were completely overbuilt. Everything was forged in that engine, and you could do a pulley swap and a really aggressive fuel system and you'd still be good. And I've heard you could get pretty high up in the horsepower, anywhere from like 8 to 900 horsepower. I've heard that these engines can still take it without ever having to get into them. And the thing about Cobras, you could never get any Cobra in an automatic. So if anybody is coming up to you trying to sell you a Cobra and they're calling it an automatic, that's not a real Cobra unless they swapped it out, because these did not come with automatic from the factory. With this car specifically, my dad was the second owner of this car. It came from North Carolina and it wound up in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which is where my dad bought it. I believe that was over the winter of 2001, going into 2002 when he bought it. And then he gifted it to me, bless his heart, when I graduated college. And I barely had the car for a year before I gave it back to him. He always said, you know, if you ever want to get rid of it, give me the first chance to buy it back. So I did, because my job had me traveling quite a bit every day, and I was putting well over 100 miles every single day, and I didn't have the heart to put so many miles on it that quickly. So he bought it back from me, and he hung on to it until 2015, and then he gave it to my brother. My brother had it sitting, I think since June or so of 2019. He had it sitting because he bought a new daily driver. It was just sitting, rotting away. Looks pretty rough. It's got all kinds of junk on the body. Needs paint real bad, look at that. New tires. See, that's cracked. Got spider webs all over it. Missing the center cap on this wheel, flat tire. But I think we'll get it running. And I asked him about it, and he said, yeah, man, you can just have it. So I was all over that. So flew down to Tennessee from Minnesota, and I had him sign the title over to me, and I hauled it over to my parents' house. And it sat there because my wife and I were in between houses at the time, and we had nowhere to put it, so we were in an apartment. So my parents let me keep it there for the year, and I just got back with it, driving it all the way up here from Tennessee. It made it. It was kind of sketchy. But it did make it. So now I can just get into what's been done with the car, what it needs, and it's a lot. It is mostly stock. Nothing too major has been done with this car, or pretty much everything that's been done to this car was from the original owner. He swapped out the stock shifter for a B&M Ripper shifter, and I'll probably keep that in there because I don't think they make that anymore. I've looked it up, and if I find it, it's always a used one on eBay, so it's kind of a little history piece. I think I'll hang on to it. Flowmaster catback is on there, and it is done. All that sound is coming from under the car. You can barely even feel a puff out of there. That needs to get replaced. The passenger side has a bunch of rust holes in the muffler, and the top of the muffler, there's a big flap that looks like a book. You know, it's basically open wide up, so you know all the exhaust sound is coming from underneath the car, not out the tailpipes. And I'll probably be getting an SLP loudmouth system. I really like the way those sound on these cars. It still has the stock manifolds, still has the stock H pipe, which I also plan to swap out. I've been looking at the Bassani mid-length headers. The Cooks are just insanely expensive. If you want to get good long tubes, I mean, those things, I see them for like $1,300, $1,400. So I figured the Bassanis were still pretty good quality and would still probably be worth the swap, I would think. And then couple that with their high flow X pipes, because this factory thing has 4 catalytic converters on it. The car also has 373 gears in it right now, also from the original owner. If I recall, these cars came with 327 gears from the factory, so that definitely woke the car up. I did pull the kick panel, and I found that he had also put in a Jet performance chip. I remember having one of those for my Trans Am when I was 18, and I stupidly bought one without even checking to see if it was even the stock computer set up. But of course I pulled the kick panel and there's already a chip in there, so I felt stupid. But lesson learned, check for mods before you assume everything is stock, just before driving it up, just to make it as roadworthy as possible. It still had the original plug wires, and they were in really bad shape. It still fired fine, but you know, you never know when they're going to really crap out and start arcing, and you know, they were crumbling and you could almost see the core in a couple of them. So those are gone. I saved the factory ignition coils, but I have them in a box right now. I tried a pair of those Screaming Demon ones and I didn't have any issues with those. New plugs, which I also believe might be the originals that I pulled out of there. So I've got some new NGKs, and then some new 9mm Ford Racing wires I put in. New fuel filter, I did that. A new serpentine belt. Other than that, everything is the same. Still the factory fuel pump, water pump, alternator, that's all the original stuff. It got kind of sketchy on the way up here. Like I said, I drove it from Tennessee to Minnesota. Pretty early on in the trip, I got a code for an O2 sensor, left bank, sensor 1, and then I noticed when I pulled off the interstate to get gas, it sounded different on idle, so I scanned it again and I had another code for low voltage on the throttle position sensor, so I'm going to have to deal with that. And then the last time I pulled off the interstate, when I finally took my exit to go home, I noticed, you know, kind of a loud grinding sound that seemed to come and go when I used the clutch pedal. Also, I think the clutch is finally done. That has been confirmed. It's garbage, so that's going to go. Long-term plans, paint. The paint is horrible on this car. I don't know what it is about Ford stuff. Their white cars from this time frame had a real big problem with their paint peeling off and just the gray primer underneath. And you know, you'd see that on pretty much anything that was painted white. Certainly all the old police interceptors were like that too. But the roughest part is the roof. When my brother had it, it sat outside and it was exposed to the elements, and more paint started flaking off, and you know, now it's starting to rust on the top, which is a shame, but it's manageable. It's still just surface rust, and it hasn't really cut too deep into the metal yet that I can tell. That'll be dealt with. But as far as long-term plans, I do want to go for boost. I'm leaning towards supercharger over turbo, but it's kind of a tough call. I don't know if I want to go with a centrifugal or a positive displacement. But the only unfortunate thing for that is the only option you really have is the Kenny Bell 2.1, and it's non-intercooled. And I don't need a beast. I mean, I'm sure it would be plenty of power for me to enjoy. But those are really your only options for that. And then, you know, centrifugal, you've got your Vortex and your Pro Chargers. And they're quite a bit more expensive, I've noticed. When I look up kits, you know, it's well over $7,000. And the Kenny Bell comes in, you know, a little under $4,000. But yeah, it may come down to cost. I just don't know right now. The transmission, I may upgrade. I don't know if I want to bother rebuilding a T45. There's nothing special about those. I've been looking at maybe that TKX new 5-speed they make that replaced the older TKOs, or maybe swapping in a T56 6-speed, and that would be really sweet. Gears will probably stay the same. If I do change them, I don't know if I would get much more aggressive than like a 410. Wheels and tires are absolutely going. I am not a huge fan of these factory wheels, especially because they're so skinny. These are tiny. They're like 17, I think, by 8s, and they have, my brother put these little skinny 235 tires on there. Yeah, it just looks horrendous. And the ride height, you know, it's almost this bad, but the car is up on jack stands right now, but it's not that much higher up than what it usually is at regular ride height. So lowering springs are definitely in order, or coilovers, but we'll see. That's really about it. So thanks for checking out the car. I will update when possible